Good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed lunch. My name is Missy Minter, and I'm one of the FOIFT board members, and I'll be moderating this great panel. We had a quick change. Tony Pohetsky had an urgent matter he had to attend to that was an emergency. He's okay, but we drafted our award winner, Pat Canty, to step up, and so everyone give him a round of applause because he just got 2 minutes notice of the panel here. As you heard at lunch, Pat is the regional vice president and publisher of the Odessa American, and he won the 2021 James Madison Award. And so he also just won for their story that we're going to talk about in a little bit on the Class A smaller market category for the squad. And so we'll talk about that. And to his left, we have Karina Kumar, and she's a recent UT graduate, so she's a Longhorn. And she studied journalism here and got a certificate in computing, and her specialty is data and data collection and data. She was the data fellow, is that right? So in the media innovation group, and now she's escaped Texas for cooler temperatures in Minnesota, is my understanding. We won't hold that against her for too long, just for a minute, just a small minute. And we're going to talk about some neat work she's done in data-driven open records requests and data-driven government transparency. And then to her left, we have Lauren McGahey. And Lauren is an investigative reporter and the editor of the Texas Newsroom, which is a statewide collaboration of NPR member stations. She's based at KUT in Austin. She is what I refer to behind her back as the open records goddess. She's feared far and wide by most public officials for her equality open records requests, and she never gives up. And so she is a dog with a bone when she gets a hold of something, and that's what we love about her. And she's going to talk about some of her really interesting and cool requests, and then we want to leave time for you guys to ask questions. So if that works, we will get started. All right. So Pat, since you got drafted as first victim, I'm not going to make you go first. How's that? Because, that didn't seem like that's too fair. So I think I will start with my first question for Karina. So Karina, let's start with Minnesota. So what projects have you done in Minnesota that you feel like successfully impacted open government? And how does the Minnesota Public Information Act compare to the Texas one? Because I know each state is different. Some are presumptively open, some of them are presumptively closed, and some of them are neutral. So tell us about Minnesota.
Yeah. So one of my first stories and big stories I worked on when I was in Minnesota this summer was about beach closures and bacteria levels at beaches. It's the land of 1,000 lakes, and they really care about their lakes. And they do testing at their beaches weekly for bacteria levels. And if the bacteria is too high, they will close the beach. And they post that weekly data on a map so you can see if your beach is closed or not, but they don't show you the historical data. That being said, if they're taking it and they're reporting it at some point, I knew that they probably had the historical data stored somewhere. So we requested that historical data going back as far as they would give us, essentially. And they ended up coming back to us with 2014 through 2024 and the most recent of 2025 that they had, their weekly testing data and their log of closures of beaches. So when a beach was closed and when it reopened. So they actually gave us more than we asked for, which was even better. But after looking at that, I had seen that there was an increase in closures as well as an increase in average bacteria levels in the beaches over the past few years, past 11 years, and more recently higher, especially. So that was kind of a really big deal, especially that means that these beaches are closing more often. They're less accessible to people who want to be enjoying them. And they do this testing in the summer. So especially when it's high peak season. I think that was a big eye opener to the park board who was doing the testing. They didn't really look at the data the same way I looked at it. And so once I showed that to them, the main person running that was like, oh, I didn't really know, like she was not aware of that trend over time. So we haven't seen any change from that. That was just this summer, but I do think it's something that they are now talking about a lot more of. As for Minnesota versus Texas, Minnesota also actually has pretty open rules about government documents and reports. That being said, they have the really, really fun rule of you get it in a reasonable amount of time, which is not at all defined other than like reasonable. Versus Texas has at least the 10 days, but that's also 10 days, or they could go to the Attorney General. So, the Attorney General being involved in the process here in Texas can also make that process longer. But in Minnesota, it kind of is an indefinite amount of time. The Attorney General there also can get involved in cases, but it's more so they go to the courts first and you work through that. So they're actually quite open as well as Texas, but there's a little bit of differences in the specificity.
Do you have an opinion on whether or not you prefer the Attorney General's involvement in a ruling capacity, or you prefer Minnesota where you just have to go to the agency and then have to go to court? Do you have a preference? What are your feelings on that?
I don't know that I have a preference on, I kind of think I prefer the court, because a lot of times I feel like when we're fighting with the Attorney General, it ends up in a court case anyway at some point. So it's kind of like, why not just get there initially? But I also think that Texas having a 10-day rule definitely gets people to actually get back to you in a reasonable amount of time versus just saying a reasonable amount of time. And they could say that means a month, and they actually were working on the data, but you have no idea because it's been a month now. So,
right. Laura, next question for you. I know you've had a lot of open records requests to the governor's office related to Elon Musk. Can you provide like a short background on those requests and how the responses have been going? Specifically, I know the governor's office has argued that some of the information is confidential by law and it's been redacted. So I was curious if you would like to give a little background on that before we talk about some cost issues related to that.
So I didn't really know what I was looking for when I first started filing requests to the governor's office about Elon Musk, fishing expedition, if you will. And so...
See, she is the goddess, right?
Anyone can do it. And so the most basic request I filed was just any communications between anyone in the governor's office and anyone with an @Tesla, @Boring, @X email address, because I knew that would at least capture employees and maybe Musk if they were using those official email addresses. And that was the one that we had completely denied. First, the governor's office asked us to clarify, which we did a couple of times, and then they continued to ask us to clarify, and eventually I just said, no, I'm not narrowing this anymore. Then they said, this is going to take several hundred hours worth of staff time, and it's going to cost you about $400. So we cut the check, gave them the $400. And then they said, actually, we're taking you to the AG. We don't think any of this is public. So that's something that we're seeing more. I'm seeing more.
And kept your money as well?
Kept my money, yeah. And it was mine because I was impatient, so I used one of my personal checks. That's something I've been seeing more across different agencies, is requesting payment up front and then on the back end taking you to the AG and saying, well, just kidding, we're not going to give you anything. And then waiting to see what the response is from the Attorney General.
Refunding your money.
Not refunding the money, no.
Okay.
And so we were waiting for the Attorney General's opinion. We got our 10 and 15-day letters, and we ended up writing about this after we got our 15-day letter from the governor's office, which most of you probably know lays out the reasons why they think the records should not be public. And we decided to write about the issue then instead of waiting for the AG's office to make its final decisions. That's the last public reporting we've done.
And we know that House Bill 4219 that was passed, the session just went into effect September 1st, will not allow the 15-day letters to be the same anymore. The 10-day letter now has to specify all the exemptions. So everybody should be looking out for that. That's a new piece of legislation that passed this session. So thank you for that. And we can circle back to...
Oh, and I just want to point out, Karina is back in Texas. And I just want to shout her out. I worked with her when she was at UT with Christian McDonald's data class. And the journalism students are a great resource if you work at an institution that wants to partner with journalism students. They have data courses, and Karina worked with us on stories that we are still planning to publish.
Great.
Coming up soon. So look to your institutions of higher education for very talented people you can partner with, even while they're studying.
And one of the things I was really interested in talking about with with her was Minnesota, because as we know, Senator Betancourt filed several bills this past regular session, which would completely change how the PIA operated in Texas and make it similar to maybe some other states. And so I was curious, what her viewpoint was on Minnesota versus Texas, because there might be an effort, we think, next session to totally flip the PIA to the burden on the PIA back to the agency getting to decide, and the requesters having to do that uphill battle. But it's interesting that your experience wasn't that was that stressful.
Yeah, I was really lucky, actually. Having just graduated and even doing stuff while I was in school, I was really lucky that a lot of things I've worked on did not end up needing to go to the AG in any way, or in Minnesota having to go up to a court or anything like that, which kind of also speaks to one of the other things I want to talk about, which is that a lot of cases I was requesting data that I knew already existed, whether that was because they had in Texas had to file it to the TEA, so I knew that report already existed, and then I said, hey, can I see that? Or in Minnesota, I knew they were already doing this testing, so I knew they had to have it somewhere. So a little bit less of like data creation and more like, I know this exists, which would be my advice to anybody looking for data through requests is if you know they're already sending it internally or something like that, and you're expecting it should be public, that's a lot easier to get usually.
Did you reveal that to the governmental entity? Did they know that you knew it existed already?
In some cases, yes. I can talk on local campaign finance, which was one that definitely, we did a big project when I was at UT looking into smaller elections and who was funding those. So local campaign finance reports. We specifically looked at school districts and to see who are the contributors to these big school board elections. And in that case, we had tried to request specific reports initially, and at a few small districts or a few big districts and just a smaller scope of districts. And once we knew what existed, we knew exactly what to request at all the other districts we wanted to look at. And so if they came back to us and said, we don't know what you're talking about, we were able to say, okay, but here's an example. We know that this file is supposed to exist. If you don't have it, then there should be some reasoning. In some cases, candidates don't have to file if they're only receiving a minimal amount of donations or whatever that is. But it definitely a case of like knowing what we needed and being able to ask them directly for it, and kind of starting smaller. And then when we broadened the scope of that, we were able to request the same thing from other places as well.
Pat, what's your experience with that in Odessa? Do you oftentimes tell the governmental bodies that you actually know what you're looking for, that you have it, or do you kind of hold that back and wait?
Sometimes we do, and it's gotten so bad with us that they pretty much know what we're looking for. We don't even have to tell them. They know they're going to get caught. They're so bad in our town, and this was part of this previous lawsuit we were involved in, where we were just going for police reports. Now, I'm an old-fashioned guy. When I was a cop reporter in San Antonio, Michael was the same way. You'd go to the desk sergeant, and they'd have a stack of police reports. And you just get a police report, and you type your story in it, show you all the basic information. And we would have to FOI every police report. And when it finally got around to getting to us, it looked like something that was highly classified. It was all blacked out. And it got so bad, they were so notorious with the AG's office because they would send everything to the AG's office. And at one point, we FOI'd some stuff, and it came back. There was a back and forth with the AG on this one case. And there was basically a note from the AG's office to the city attorney saying, we've already told you that this kind of stuff is basic information. Stop sending this to us. And the city attorney wrote back, we know that it's basic information, and we know that you don't want us to send it, but we're going to send it to you anyway. So that's kind of how we have to deal with it. And so what we've done is we file FOI requests. It's almost like getting up and milking the cows. I mean, every day this reporter will come in and they'll file all sorts of FOI requests just to get basic information that we've been able to find out all sorts of stuff. We were able to uncover a lot of corruption in this last regime with a mayor and some council people, and we were able to show how they were basically awarding $300,000 contracts that weren't going out for bids to political cronies, how they were At one point, the mayor had a political opponent or a critic, and the mayor called the police chief and said, I want you to go and question this guy, and we might want to file charges against him because he is over in this council member's neighborhood, stalking on this day at this time. And when it turned out that person wasn't even in town that day and at that time, and no one knew it was the mayor that did this. And by filing, we got a hold of a police report. It's funny, we had to file an FOI request, but then somehow there was another person in the city that knew what we were doing, and they gave us a copy of the police report. And in the meantime, the mayor said, oh, I had nothing to do with this. And so we said, well, that's funny. You're named in the police report as the guy that filed the complaint. So we basically we were able to get the electorate to wake up, and they turned out in record numbers and voted this slate out of office. It wasn't until before, though, practically every major department head in the city resigned or was fired. The city had their bond rating downgraded because they had not filed city audits for 2 years in a row. And so it was funny because even though the new slate of officers came in, my editor would be there like, well, yeah, but we're still going to be busy for the next couple of months because we still have a whole batch of FOI requests that we had done while the bad bunch, the squad was still in office, and they're not due to come back to us for another couple of weeks. We'll be able to find out some more stuff that we'll be writing about. So I just, using FOI requests, using public records, it's been the one thing, this industry obviously has been challenged, but it's been the one thing that's really rejuvenated my trust in our industry on how you can really do a community service just by blocking and tackling. And that means filing FOI requests, filing open records requests, attending, open meeting requests, and finding out just, what they're up to and keeping your electorate and your citizenry informed.
Can I just add something about police reports? Something that I've noticed that's been interesting, talking about how accessible certain information was in the past. Now everything, you have to file a FOIA for everything. It feels like fewer and fewer spokespeople are actually being spokespeople at agencies. And that's not true of every agency, but they'll just say you have to file a FOIA for a basic question. They won't answer questions anymore. Maybe that's just me. Maybe they're answering other people's questions. But something I noticed recently was in this Musk coverage, it's been publicly reported that he has some homes here in the Austin area, and that a neighbor had filed a complaint against him, had gone to the police, or Musk's people had gone to the police against his neighbor. There's, some back and forth. And I asked for that police report that had already been released in the New York Times. I was given it. And then I wanted to know if there were other police calls to that address. And I asked for any others, and I was taken to the AG. This was by the Travis County Sheriff's Office because they service Westlake Hills. And the AG actually came back, and I'd never seen this before. They said this was just calls to service, so not even the police basic information, but a log of police calls to this address where Elon Musk has a property. They would not release even the log because exposure of that information could put a public official at risk. And they noted in the briefing that I'm a reporter that is liable to publish the information that I get, and that the information is about someone with a public stature who could be subject to threats if that information is released.
So do you think that was, they were speaking about Musk, or you think they were speaking about the person that the police was called on? Or
It was about Musk. Yeah, I mean, it was obvious.
So they were, when he was a public official.
Yeah. But then when I went to APD about a home that he has within the Austin city limits, they gave me those calls of service. And so just the different ways that different agencies, even right next to each other, are interpreting the law. There's just so many holes in the TPIA right now. There's so many exceptions, so many carve-outs that you never really know what you're going to get when you file something.
it's sad. We wrapped up a very expensive lawsuit. It took a long time, and we got the Supreme Court of the state decided not to hear it. But basically, the city prevailed. We were requesting these unredacted police reports, and we had some amazing stories, like just how bad of a disservice it did to the people of the community. There was an example of there was one day a guy drives into a car wash and walks into the owner's office right there in broad daylight in front of all these people and shoots the owner of the car wash, and then leaves. He wound up shooting himself later, but no one. And this was after we had a mass shooting. This is about a month or two after a mass shooting in Odessa, and so it broke over Facebook and things like that, and people were just beside themselves because they thought, oh, there's another shooter roaming around Odessa, and we were trying to get just basic information to release, not only that day but in the days that followed, and we had the FOI stuff. We weren't able to get the final reports. I think it was like 3 months later that we were able to say, no, this wasn't some crazy guy. This was a guy that was cheating with the guy's wife, and it was a domestic thing, and he went and killed him. So the town was going crazy for at least a week, just because they didn't see fit to give it to us. There's another one with DPS is horrible to deal with. DPS, we've gotten things that to this day, like there's elements of that mass shooting that DPS was responsible for. They still haven't given us certain types of information because guess what? They say it's still under investigation. Well, they killed the guy the day they did it, and it's been what, 3, 4, 5 years. So I mean, it's really like it's very frustrating.
Lauren, I think you have some same experience on Uvalde, right? I mean, like Uvalde, where DPS doesn't give records and you're investigating for.
I wasn't involved with the Uvalde.
I know you weren't involved with
coverage,
Uvalde, but like DPS doesn't give records for years and years.
It's true, and although sometimes they will give you a record, it's interesting to note when they will. There've been a couple of very public incidents at the Capitol, one allegedly involving a lobbyist and a young woman. This was just before the pandemic, just after, I can't remember. Time is pancaked. And there was a lot of criticism about some false reporting allegations, and it had gone to the Rangers, and DPS ended up handing people Rangers investigative files because they wanted to kind of clear things up in their view about the work that they had done. But then when you try to get those and it was during the investigation, you try to get those same files for something that they don't necessarily want to be open with. Again, it's the shall may kind of dichotomy of the records law, different interpretations.
And also, the loophole that the city used against us in the lawsuit that prevailed, they got away with it, which was, well, I know it took 3 months to give them those reports, but they ultimately got them, so no harm, no foul.
Right.
And that is a huge loophole right now, because it's like saying, well, you know what? Then what good is the FOI law? If I can game you until right before you go to court, or right when we're in the court, and just say, oh, give it to them, we're okay then. It's like robbing a bank and saying you take the money back 3 weeks later. Well, don't charge me with bank robbery.
I think there was a lot of that experience coming up to the last election, and there probably will be coming up to the next election, where they release it the day after the primary or the day after the election. I know I'm sure y'all have had that experience as well. The timing of the release, the promptly definition promptly ends up being at convenience, not necessarily at your convenience.
Yeah, and what's really crazy about all of this is, and the beauty of getting these public records, is you were able to find out so much. And these elected officials, they act like they'll sit there and they'll lie to your face, and they've got to know in the back of their mind that I'm going to eventually get that public record, and it's going to tell me the truth, right? to this day, there's still some elected officials out there. They don't get that, and that's so funny. It's like, wow, don't you realize I'm going to find out the truth because this document will tell me everything I need to know.
And do you feel like that's because they want to stall the timing so it's the most convenient, or that's just a lack of integrity?
I think it's a little of both, and I think some of them I think they're not too smart. They get real political about their decisions, and I don't think they don't see what they're doing is serving the public. It's them being in control of something, and they just don't think out something that far down the road.
It's something that it has eroded. I mean, I've been here about 12 years now, and I feel like 10 years ago there were, and again, this isn't true of every agency is different, but there used to be more spokespeople that would have a on background or off the record conversation with you, and they wanted you to get the story right. They wanted the information out there to be correct, because if it's incorrect, then no one is served by that, right? And I feel like I'm unable to make those relationships as much as I would, not knowing if that's coming from up higher, from the executive level to these spokespeople. And then, of course, my recourse is, well, I don't know what's correct or not, so I'm going to have to file a records request to make sure I can get as close to that truth as possible, because I've seen, and we were talking about this a couple hours ago, I've seen amongst some agencies a desire for the press to get it wrong. They don't give you the answers. You maybe can't get a record, and a story comes out that's incorrect or whatever, and then they come back and say, well, see, they got it wrong. And I think in my case, you can't publish at all if you're not sure, right? Like the story isn't going to happen if you don't have access to that information. But I've felt that change in the last 10 years, where it feels like people are being told, don't have those conversations where you can correct the bad stuff on the front end. A lack of trust is there, and it's starting to happen both ways more and more, and I think that's really detrimental to everybody, because then the public doesn't get the right information as quickly as they can.
Pat, are you having that experience as well?
Yeah, it's gotten very the relationships with PIOs and things and the politicians. It's gotten very much that you're the bad guy. Be careful with them. Put your hand out as much as possible. We had an incident 2 weeks ago with the local community college board, which, I mean, the average age is like 90, and they've been on the board forever, and all they are is a rubber stamp for the president of the college, the community college. And something came up, and it was about a tax. They floated some debt. They had 2 back-to-back bond issues that were huge bond issues. They wanted to do all this stuff with the campus, and they've been spending money like water anyway. First time the electorate said no, we voted it down. They held a second one, the very next election. No, not going to do that. So the board came back and said, you know what? We don't care what y'all say. We're going to vote to issue that debt anyway.
Interesting.
And when our reporter was at the board meeting afterward, was just wanting to ask the board members questions about why did you choose to do this? And they were shut down by the PIO, who basically told us, you really need to submit those questions in writing to me, and we'll make sure they get a hold of them and they answer. And when my editor complained about it the next day, and she CC'd me on the email, this woman wrote back it's one of these, it's almost like a gaslighting thing. It's like, thank you for reaching out to us. We want to do everything we can to have a positive relationship and get you the information you need in the timeliest fashion. If you would be so kind as to issue these, it's just like some boilerplate recording on an answering machine. And it's like, I can't believe that. And the thing is, one last thing, I'll shut up. The thing that really gets me is
we're just so glad you decided to volunteer.
They don't like us, and it's gotten worse. And what they don't understand is that this isn't about us. It's about every person who lives in that town.
Right.
Every person who goes down to City Hall and says, I'd like that public record. I'm entitled to that public record. And they say, no, you have to fill out this online form and it might cost you some money, $300 or like in that and for us, we'll fight that. But what do you think that does to your average Joe Schmo that walks in there and they're just going to say, never mind.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Karina, do you have you've been a student reporter. Mm-hmm. I mean, when somebody slaps you with a bill of a couple $100s, you got to give up, right?
Yeah. Especially as a student journalist, if you're not working with like a publication that has money,
what publications have money?
It's really difficult, and it's definitely like it makes you hesitate. And I think especially student journalists hesitate to file requests because of that fear. One thing I would say, my advocation for data journalism is, and I read, this was a NICAR panel or a NICAR session, as well as there was an article written about it, about how to get your costs down, and was talked about in an earlier panel. But especially if they're trying to do something with data manipulation, if you can do that yourself in the spreadsheet yourself, you can always go back to them and say, what exactly are you doing? Ask for the itemized list of things that they're trying to do that are costing them money. And then you can say, hey, I can do that. You don't have to do that manipulation. Really, the only thing that they have to do that we can't do, in my opinion, is redactions, because we can't look at that. And in that case, that usually brings that cost down a lot. That would be my biggest advice, is like, go back to them. I know sometimes timeliness makes it more difficult when you're on a deadline, but keep communicating with them and be like, where are these costs coming from? And maybe it's something I can do for you. The panel or the session that I saw at NICAR, I can't remember her name, but she talked about how she sent them a little screen recording of how to do the thing in Excel so that it took them like 3 seconds instead of an hour or however long they said it was going to take. So things like that, like use our resources to even help them in some way so that they don't have to charge you for the work that you could do, kind of thing.
Lauren, what's your experience along those lines? Do you often negotiate cost with the governmental body, and how does that go for you?
Yeah, great advice. Always negotiate. Obviously, like you said, it hurts the deadline, but it helps the bottom line, and you kind of have to do it. I think also, I'm seeing a lot of things where public records custodians are still charging for copies. So that'll be in the itemized thing, and I'll have to come back and say, I asked for this electronically. Can you please take out the charge for copies? Is there a way I can narrow this? Maybe I asked for a month and I end up asking for 2 weeks. Again, that restarts the clock and the 10 days start back over. But if you have some time, and you might be able to slash the cost down. And there's some agencies that are really, really willing to work with you on bringing the cost down, because it's time for them too, especially small agencies. They may have one person working on records. And so I get that, like, my request could be onerous for them. And so if I can help them make their job easier, I will. On this Abbott Musk thing, I can just wrap that up. So we paid the $400 for these, several hundred pages of communications between Abbott's office and Musk's people. He took us to the AG, and we got a decision. And we're going to be writing about this soon in more detail, so I'm not going to let all the news out there.
I see Debbie, I see my boss. I told her just to say a little bit.
We got a decision from the Attorney General's office that was in our favor, and a portion of it was in our favor. And so I thought, oh my God, we're about to get records. I wonder what we're going to get. And it took them about a month to put the records together. It was 1,374 pages, so a lot. And about 1,350 of them were completely redacted. It was a page that was all black.
Which you paid for.
That we paid for, $400. Sorry, Debbie, my boss. And to me, I was actually, Missy and I were talking about this yesterday. I was like, why would they even give me 1,300 redacted pages? Isn't that the same as not giving me anything? And you said.
I said, actually, it's not. It shows you that there was a page that existed. And so the theory is they give you the page black is to show you that there was information there, even though you can't see it. So you actually got a page, even though you can't see anything on that page. So it's the proof of existence. It kind of goes to the federal FOIA and the UFO theory. So
this
telling
was
her it's a
like-
way back theory for the UFOs.
This is about, I think the request was for 4 months or 6 months of communications, just between the governor's office staff and people with these 3 distinct email address domains. And there's 1,374 pages of communications that I have in my hands and I can't read them. And so it's that kind of thing where, and there's an extra wrinkle that we'll reveal in our reporting, but it's that kind of thing that I get discouraged about, because I did win kind of with General Paxson, and he said we deserved to get some things, and it still felt like a loss.
Are you willing to talk a little bit about the federal angle, the congressman angle at all? Or you want to hold that?
Oh, no, I can.
Okay.
So, because we mostly reported this, you mean about the
The email that you got.
Well, we've already publicly reported that.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I was like, do I know what I'm talking
Well,
about?
I don't know if everybody here knows.
I mean, a win in this, a bright side in this, is that as part of this whole reporting on Elon Musk's leverage over the Capitol, right, we also filed records requests with legislators. And, most legislative communications are completely in a black box. Constituent emails are in a black box. But if you don't live in Texas, then you can't be a constituent. And so we got a very small number of communications back from Dan Patrick's office from a staffer who works for a Texas congressman, because that staffer lives in Washington, D.C. and not Texas, and therefore does not count as a constituent. And in those 5 or 6 pages, there was a text message between this congressional staffer and Dan Patrick's staff asking to meet about a tunneling project that Elon, quote unquote, wanted to pursue in Houston. And it was that single text message that we then were able to file more requests at the local level and at the legislature, and unraveled a story that Elon Musk wants to build tunnels under Houston for flood mitigation. His tunnels are much smaller than the tunnels they've studied for 8 years or so since Harvey. But he's, making the pitch that he can do it more cheaply. And this particular congressman, who may or may not jump into our attorney general's race, Wesley Hunt, has been out there pitching this idea to Dan Patrick and Senate budget staffers and commissioners, court members for 6 months. And this is something we would not have known about because it's never been mentioned in a public meeting. It's never been vetted publicly. And it was a single text message that led us down this road. So of the, 1 out of 10 records requests maybe yield something, but sometimes there's some information that's really important for the public to know because it's been shielded until
So
then.
one of my favorite stories, when I was a chief of open records, I worked on the files related to the Enron matter in Houston. And there was one email that was an email from the mailroom supervisor to the runners at Enron. And the email said, go out and buy more shredding bags. They are shredding everything upstairs. And it was one of the few things that got released, and it kind of sparked the whole investigation. And because all the execs knew better than to put anything in writing, and there was a total shutdown of all communications. But God bless the runners, had to run out to Office Depot and get more shredding bags. But I mean, it was like those small little gems that.
The thing that I've learned is always be filing. Right?
Always be. She's the goddess.
File records requests. Get used to knowing how to file them correctly in a way that doesn't give the public records custodian more work than they need to have already in their very busy world. And, if you file one and it doesn't seem to work out, maybe you didn't use the right word, or maybe the time frame is a little bit off, and don't give up. Maybe tweak it a little bit. Run it by a friend. Does this sound like I should get something from this? Try again.
Yeah. Karina, I bet you have that same attitude, right? Just keep writing them. Don't give up.
I was just going to say, Lauren and I were talking before this about you file so many and you get one golden document. But you don't get that unless you file, right? And I feel like it's, especially when we're in a business that sometimes the timeliness really, really matters and you're on a deadline. If you're filing ahead of time, sometimes that gives you the story in the first place and then you already have it, instead of having there's always going to be cases where you have to file after the fact to try to figure out what happened. But if you file ahead of time and you're just constantly looking, that's when you find a story that no one else has found, kind of thing. So always be filing. We sometimes FOIA Friday is a thing that I try to, where you
Friday.
just submit some
I like that.
FOIAs.
FOIA's Fridays.
I filed 3 today just sitting in the audience. Sorry, records custodians who are in the room. I'm really
I'm
sorry.
going to ask Pat one more question, then I want to open it up for questions. What do we have? About 15 more minutes? Okay, so Pat, I want to give you a chance to talk about what you won the award for. Whatever you want to say about the matter that you guys won the award
this
for.
one, well, it's all thanks to my editor and the reporter. They basically used FOIA requests. The local Republican Party was taken over hijacked by some really hardcore right types.
Shocking.
And they literally started stacking the deck with precinct chairs, and they literally endorsed a council candidate, a slate of council officers, which political parties and city council races don't do. But they said, no, we're going to double down on this. We believe this. And so they ushered in, and the electorate was just asleep at the wheel. They just weren't engaged. And they elected this mayor and these council people that we refer to obnoxiously as the squad. And they did all sorts of things. Like I said, they ran off incredibly valuable long-term employees. They fired a bunch. They hired a city manager who used to be an assistant director of the state Republican Party. And they paid a search, and we found out a lot of this from FOIA requests. They hired a consulting firm out of Fort Worth. They paid them over $300,000 to conduct this city manager search. And what we found out was that the consulting firm was a guy that was a former cop who had no experience in any of this kind of thing. But he had some Republican connection with this group. And they basically, they came up with all this criteria that they wanted in a city manager. You had to have city manager's experience and things like that. They wound up hiring this former Republican Party chief who got a degree in agriculture or wildlife management or something, had no city manager experience. He wasn't even among the finalists. But because we were able to piece and put together things through FOI requests, we were able to find out that basically the mayor and his squad basically said, no, you know what? You're going to put this guy as a finalist. They told this to the consulting guy. You're going to put him as a finalist, and then they picked him. So so we were able to, just by using freedom of information, accessing public documents, we were able to put together so much stuff, and we just keep hitting with the story, and then our editor would do a follow-up editorial. And we got rid of them. The public woke up and voted them out of office.
Congratulations.
Huh?
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
All right, let's open it up to questions, because I know you got to have questions for this group. All right, let's go front here. And I'm going to repeat the question so that it's on the recording. This question is what caused, or what's the factors that went into the breakdown of trust between the state, well, I guess any government, PIOs, and journalists. And Lauren had mentioned 10 years ago, and the question sort of is what's happened? What's the difference? What do you think the difference is?
I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to speak for myself, but I feel like, we as journalists have to take some responsibility for this. I think for a long time, the media has expected the public to trust us, and we haven't shown our work enough. We haven't proven to them, here's the receipts. It was like this inborn thing, this Walter Cronkite era thing. And people have gotten a lot more critical of institutions. And so I think part of it is on us to prove to whoever that's out there that they should trust us by showing the documents, showing the records. Don't just be like, well, believe me, I work for X institution, right? So I think a lot of that is on us. And with the PIOs, sometimes I even find myself like assuming someone isn't going to sit down with me. And I recently had an experience, with an unnamed agency spokesperson who I'd never met, and had also never, a newer one, I had also never asked to meet. And that's something I would have definitely asked to do 10 years ago. But I had also had it in my head, like, this person isn't going to sit down and have coffee with me. And then when I did ask for that, they did.
I think have you noticed what I've noticed, and I come from the government side, that 10 years ago, a lot of the PIOs were former reporters, and the hiring has shifted from former reporters to now consultants and other types of individuals that aren't.
True.
That do
Yeah,
not
I didn't
have
think about that. That's true. There's more like people coming from the political life rather than former reporters. So that's also true. But I think, like, I'm just trying to say it goes both ways. We should be reaching out as well to build those personal relationships as humans, both trafficking in the information world, right? To try to lay that groundwork a little bit better. And then when the breakdown in the relationship inevitably happens over some story they're not happy over, at least you can meet as humans over it. So I'm trying to do a better job of that myself.
Question in the back. In the black, yeah. Yes. I can. I'll repeat it though. So the question is, can you contest when you get a ruling from the AG's office that says you're going to get stuff, but you get it back and it's totally redacted black? When I was at the AG's office, the answer to that question would have been yes. You could absolutely file a complaint, send it in, and have it rechecked. I don't know if they do that now or not, but I would always order that done and have it checked.
I did speak with someone because the AG has an open records hotline that you can call, and someone will call you back. You have to pick up your phone. If you don't pick it up, they don't leave a message. So if you see a 5122463 or whatever, like, you have to pick up that number. So I called about this request because I was confused. I was like, why am I just getting redacted pages? And they explained to me a little bit about the twists that I'm going to write about later. But when I said, well, what's my recourse? Can I fight this? They said, you can ask for us to take another look at it. But he actually said, but we're unlikely to side with you. And he said, or you can
file suit.
Go to court. So those were the two.
How are we doing on time? 5 more minutes. So more questions. I saw another hand. Yes, sir. Okay, so I think you must be a legislative staffer. No? Okay, I couldn't hear the first part of what you said. So what was the very first thing you said?
We'll just comparing that journalists and reporters that we have somewhere.
Okay, journalists. Okay. Okay, so the question is, because of all these expenses and costs and the making public information requests, what can be easier for the public, because journalists might have better access, I think is what you're saying, better access to money and things like that, but the public is at a distinct disadvantage. Is there anything that can be done about that? Karina, you want to take that?
I can try.
All right.
I mean, I think one thing that helps is the work that we do, and kind of like Lauren was saying, like, showing our work. And even if it's maybe the document that we receive that is public information, we're getting it because we're citizens as well. So even if that's sharing that with the public with the story, or sharing how we got it or what process we had to go to. In the case, they had a story where they literally said, we actually didn't get the documents, that sort of thing. I think what we do has a lot to do with how it helps the public. And, like, we are in a place that we're sometimes lucky enough to be able to fight those battles when a normal citizen couldn't.
And I'll make a plug for both the hotlines, the Freedom of Information Foundation hotline that I answer. We love helping. I love helping citizens that call. I like helping reporters too, but helping citizens is nice because they truly don't have any idea what to do or how to complain or do those kind of things. And that to me is very helpful. The Open Government hotline, the Open Records hotline as well. I mean, they will if somebody's really egregious, call and say something to a governmental body. And so the citizens, it's really helpful if they reach out and use those free resources that are available to them.
And you should support the Freedom of Information Foundation because they're the ones that are in the trenches that work with legislation that helps protect these types of things, or helps eliminate the loopholes that people who want to abuse the laws do. They do a lot of important work with our legislators. So
I would say like talk to your friends about it. I know it's probably like that's the dirtiest thing to say to someone. You look like you're a young person. You're not going to like go to the bar and talk about FOIA. But I mean, I think a lot of members of the public don't actually know that they have the same access to public information as a reporter does. The law applies to all of us equally. And, you know, there are some really active citizens and then some that would never think or even know that they could file a request with their city council or their local police department about an issue that they care about, whether it's their kid's school or crime or whatever. And it's really empowering when you do that work. And so I think even just telling people like, hey, did you know anyone can ask for these records?
Blog about it, post on social media about it.
Yeah.
If you did it, post on
If you're a
social media
journalist,
about it.
write stories about public records, like write
Basics.
literally about what you get and what you don't get and why. They're sometimes not the best read stories, so you have to make your argument to your editor like this is a public service. But they're important because again, they show that work. They show we're not just gadflies out there doing the bare minimum and putting out gossip. Like we're really trying to get the information, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't.
All right. Well, I think we're at time. Oh, Kelly? All right. Kelly gets to ask questions. First of all, while we have the chance, can we all thank Kelly for what a fantastic conference? She did a great job she does for us. So Kelly, let me repeat the question. So Kelly's, for the recording, Kelly's asking about the lawsuit you filed and when they're on the redacted police reports, what is it like now? What happened now?
So it's gotten better. They're a lot better about. We don't really have a problem with the police reports anymore. What's really interesting is that the reform mayor that got elected, was the attorney that represented the city of a previous lawsuit we filed against them for violating Open Meetings Act. And we went to arbitration with them, and he was their attorney, and we got them to agree to do all sorts of stuff to abide by the law in the future. And it's all in a court decree, so they have to do it. And now this guy is the mayor, and he sees just how valuable of service we provided. So it's a totally different relationship now. They're much more open, and they get it a lot better. So
Good. All right, Ian, you want to come up? He's got before you all get up, Ian's got a few short remarks. Let's thank the panelists.